This video is sponsored by Only Crits. A couple of months ago, I posted the following as a community post on my channel. Oops, my 6th level party just got their hands on the Sword of Kas. Things are about to get really interesting. And I got a couple of comments that I completely understand, where people basically said, what do you mean, oops? You put it in your game, you have to expect that the players might get their hands on it. And listen, I'm right there with you. Every time I've seen a post like this on social media or mentioned in a video, I always think to myself, well, yeah, if you put it in the game, the players might get it. You can't act surprised when that happens. In Matt Colville's old campaign diaries, whenever he mentioned that his players got their hands on the super awesome magical shield when they were only level 1 and he didn't expect that to happen, I was always like, well, it couldn't have happened if you didn't put it in front of them. Clearly, on some level, you had to know this was a possibility. But in my case, it wasn't. The Sword of Kas was not on the table at all. It was not going to appear in this campaign at all. But my players still got it, so here we are. So now I have to figure out what's going to happen next. And because I never do D&D prep unless it's actually part of one of these videos, today I'm going to figure out the consequences for the players getting their hands on the Sword of Kas. Specifically, today I'm going to figure out what factions are looking for this sword. 3 factions, all of whom want the sword for different reasons. There are other factions in my campaign that might want this sword if they find out it exists and what it does, but it's not on their radar. But I want to introduce some factions that are already looking for this sword and have very clear plans about what they're going to do with it when they get their hands on it. If you like these kinds of videos where I literally do my prep for my D&D campaign that I wouldn't do otherwise because I'm always putting off my D&D prep in favor of making videos, so if I can make my D&D prep a part of my videos, that's the only way I ever get anything done for my campaign. But if you like watching this process and you want to see more videos like it, let me know in the comments below. Now, originally I was going to open this video with a more in-depth recap of how my players got their hands on the sword, but I realized it was just becoming a campaign diary, and I don't make campaign diaries on my channel, for a few reasons. One, I don't want these campaign diaries to slow down just because our game is on pause for the holidays or because the players are busy or something like that. I already have a group text thread of people who want to play D&D and are trying to find the time to do so. I don't also want to have a bunch of comments from people waiting for the next campaign diary. I don't want to be letting more people down on the next installment in the D&D campaign. So if I ever do campaign diaries, I'll probably write them all while the campaign is running, but film and edit and release them once the campaign is finished, because I just hate the idea of stopping a project like that partway through, whether temporarily or permanently. The second reason I decided to cut all the campaign diary stuff out of this video is because I don't like the idea of starting a campaign diary series in the middle of a campaign. Yes, Matt Colville's very successful series of campaign diaries started in the middle of a campaign. And yes, Dingo Doodle's very successful series of campaign diaries started in the middle of a campaign. And yes, Critical Role launched in the middle of a campaign, and that seemed to work out pretty well for them as well. But why should I repeat the formula that led to incredible acclaim and success for all those people? Especially if I also want acclaim and success. Should I do a campaign diary? No, I'm sticking to my guns on this one. So, no major recap today, but the important highlights of how my players got their hands on the Sword of Kas are this. The players had a genie bottle. Now, this genie couldn't cast wishes, but he was helpful to them. The genie was an ally. Not in the annoying leftist way that I'm an ally, just that he is loyal to them. And he can also cast the spell Plane Shift. And so the players decided to use him as part of a plan to deal with a hag they want to kill. If the genie can go bamf into the plane of fire, then reappear at the hag's hut, drag her back into the plane of fire, and drop her back in front of the party in the material plane, they can essentially ambush her and take advantage of another ally of theirs, a temporary ally who can't leave the dungeon he's currently in, but would really like to kill this hag, so they want to bring her to them so they can get this ally to fight with them. It's a Cyclops who would be very helpful in a fight. Now, as I was writing the script, I realized the genies can only cast the Plane Shift spell once per day, so I'm aware of that now. I just didn't make that connection during the session because I was going off of my memory. I've had genies in my games before, and I knew they had the Plane Shift spell. I just didn't realize that the Afridi can only do that once per day. I just didn't even think about how frequently they could use it. It makes perfect sense, obviously. I just hadn't, connected it. However, before they sent the genie to go abduct the hag, the bard, who is the one who rubbed the Afridi bottle and summoned this genie, wound up going a different direction. He has spent the entire campaign lamenting that he doesn't have a better weapon, because he's a new player who didn't realize how little damage the bard would do, and I think maybe that's because he likes the way the bard plays in Baldur's Gate 3. I think that's the issue. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't played a lot of Baldur's Gate 3, certainly not as a bard, but that seems to be the source of the conflict there. He really wants a better weapon because he feels like he's useless in a fight without one. So, before this fight with the hag, where he was worried once again that he wouldn't be able to do a lot of damage, he sent this genie to go find, quote, the most powerful weapon this realm has ever seen. So the genie disappeared and reappeared a bit later, within the hour that he was summoned, and said, "Here you are, the Sword of Kas, once wielded by the vampire Kas the Bloody-Handed and used to slice off the hand and eye of Vecna. Here you are, master." The other players were less than thrilled. Oh, and of course the bard is not proficient with longswords, so now they have this incredibly powerful weapon that the person who summoned it can't even use. He could train to use it on downtime, but that's not the most pressing concern at the moment. The irony is, for quite a long time now, I have wanted to run an adventure with a low-level party getting their hands on a high-level magic item, and all these other factions coming after them. Something similar to what happens in the first season of Exandria Unlimited. If you haven't seen it, I won't get into spoilers, but ultimately, the direction of that campaign didn't quite go the direction I would have taken. Basically, I've always wanted to essentially prep a standard low-level adventure, something like Lost Mine of Phandelver, although maybe not that specific one, but something essentially very straightforward. And then in the middle of all that, I wanted to drop in this incredibly powerful magic item like the Deck of Many Things. And now the players have to deal with the fact that all these other factions definitely want to get their hands on the deck. Some of those factions were already part of the adventure, and might just shift their priorities to focus on the deck, while others would basically come out of the woodwork seeking the deck itself. And I still do want to run that campaign at some point in the future, even if it's just a short campaign, like 5 or 10 sessions. I think that would be a ton of fun. But to my surprise, the players of my current campaign basically recreated that premise right in front of me, right in the middle of this campaign. One of them used their cool new resource to literally get their hands on the most powerful magical weapon in the world. And now a bunch of people are going to want that, including, obviously, representatives of the cult of Vecna and possibly worshippers or followers of the vampire Kas. And also, you have to wonder, who had the sword originally before the genie went and got it? Because whoever that was probably not the cult of Vecna and probably not the followers or disciples of Kas, and they would also want to get the sword back. So let's figure out what factions in this world already know about this sword and would want to go after it. And then we're going to take these factions and we're going to create characters to represent these factions in the game. This is something I referenced in my recent video where I created a government for my D&D world, but our first exposure to each of these factions has to be through an NPC, and the way that NPC operates is going to tell the players an awful lot about what the faction wants, and what they're willing to do to get it. So I didn't get into that too much in that video, but I referenced it, and that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to figure out an NPC to represent these factions. So, factions that would know about the sword. Obviously, top of the list, the Cult of Vecna. The sword is a sentient blade. Oh, I haven't had it talk to the players yet. It needs to do that. But all it wants to do is eliminate Vecna and all of his worshippers. Obviously, the cult would like to do something about that. They want to get rid of the sword, ideally by finding a way to destroy it, but at the very least, locking it away under the supervision of somebody they trust. Now, this presents kind of a problem. There's literally no reason the Cult of Vecna would not send the most powerful forces they have to go get this sword. And for me, the entire purpose of introducing something like the Cult of Vecna is to throw in all of the nastiest bad guys you can, both in terms of their stat block and in terms of how evil they are, and give them an excuse to all work together towards a common goal. I could maybe make the allowance that they would not send their heaviest hitters right away because they don't want to draw too much attention to the fact that the sword is back in play. Maybe they would start by sending a powerful lieutenant, and maybe that lieutenant wouldn't be able to teleport right to the party. It would need to be somebody who has to seek them out in the general region where the sword is. Kind of like the ring wraiths hunting down the ring. It might take the Cult of Vecna a little bit of time to mobilize their forces to go after the sword with all the power they have. However, the big difference between the ring wraiths and the Cult of Vecna is that the ring wraiths were attuned to the ring. The ring was constructed by, and literally made out of, their master, so they can seek it out a lot more easily. That does not have to be the case with this sword. It would make more sense for at least some members of the cult to be able to innately know where the hand or eye of Vecna are, because those are literally part of their master. But even then, if they know where those relics are, and they have as much power as I kind of want them to have, they would have gone and found them already. So I have a good excuse for these bad guys to not immediately jump on top of my players with their most powerful members armed with their most powerful magic items. They don't immediately know that the sword has emerged. They don't sense it the same way that Sauron senses the ring. I could do that if that was more in line with the adventure I wanted to run, but right now it's not. I want there to be a little bit of a buffer time before this faction hits the valley, so they're probably not going to immediately sense that the sword is in play. We actually have a little bit of time before the cult would notice that the sword is out and about. In fact, they probably would not find out until the players start walking around with it in public and word gets back to the cult. So this can essentially be a consequence for the players not being careful. The worst possible scenario is that the players are too cavalier with the presence and existence of the sword, and that gets back to the worst people who you would never want to know the sword is out there, the Cult of Vecna. So keeping them as basically a consequence for failure to be secretive really helps me characterize where they're going to appear in this campaign, which is they're not definitely going to appear, but they will show up if the players are careless. However, remember that the sword wants to destroy the cult. The sword wants the players to destroy Vecna. And so the sword might essentially urge the players to go pick fights with cultists of Vecna. Now, that doesn't mean that the sword would automatically know where to find agents of Vecna, but it does mean that the cult should have a presence here somewhere. There should be some clues that the sword can point them towards, or that they can pick up somewhere else. There should be some consequence to having a sword that wants to kill cultists of Vecna. If there's no chapter of the cult anywhere nearby, then it doesn't matter. It could just as easily want to kill Orcus and his followers, or the Demogorgon, or just some guy named Steve. It doesn't matter unless there is actually a chapter of Vecna worshippers somewhere nearby. So we need to introduce a faction of Vecna followers in this area. In fact, I'm going to introduce them in the Temple of the Elephant. That's a whole dungeon where all these different factions are fighting because each one is using the temple to worship their own god or master. And using the Cult of Vecna would actually tie into something else I was already planning to do with that dungeon. In fact, in the next couple days, I'm already planning on putting out a video about that dungeon, the Temple of the Elephant, which is all about different factions fighting over this territory. Perfect for this series of videos about politics, which I'll remind you is ostensibly what we're doing this week. Also, once again, making that video is just an excuse for me to do my D&D prep as part of a video. I don't know when my players are going to go to that dungeon. It's on the map, but they don't have any reason to go there yet. But if they start looking around for clues of where they can find a Cult of Vecna, they might be led there. If not, well, one of my goals in the future, in some future video, is to find out other reasons to bring the players to that dungeon, some other plot hooks to draw them towards it. But that local chapter of the Vecna cult is going to be located in the Temple of the Elephant. And they need a leader. Once again, we need an NPC to represent this faction, boots on the ground. And I'm going to call this guy Ezekiel. I really like using names with biblical roots for henchmen or lieutenants. The leaders of any particular evil organization should have their own distinct name, something like Vecna or Khan or Blofeld or Thanos, but I generally like to give my henchmen names that are more familiar, and biblical names that are still kind of in use today have the advantage of being familiar to my audience because they're just names, you could just encounter them in the world, but they also often feel like names that came from a different generation. You don't meet a lot of Ezekiels or Isaacs these days, so they're also memorable and distinct. Hell, there's a whole comic book character who is just named Ezekiel. He doesn't have a superhero alter ego name. He barely even gets referred to by his last name. He's just Ezekiel. Although I'm aware that when he showed up in the movie Madam Web, he did finally get a suit and a name. Ceiling Guy. But anyway, I think Ezekiel probably looks like that comic book character. He's older, he's refined, he's thin, he has this air of legitimacy around him, he wears green finery, which is already a color I associate with Vecna for some reason. I don't know why, but I do, so that's kind of perfect already. And you know what? Let's give him Boots of Spider Climb. That's a fun magic item that my players haven't had yet, and it's a nice little wink to this comic's counterpart. His goal is to cleanse this dungeon of the other factions so it can be reconsecrated to Vecna, and then he believes Vecna will be able to enter our world through this temple. Now, I have no idea what's going to happen when the players get to the temple. I don't know which faction they're going to encounter first. I don't know if they're just going to fight them all or try to work with some of them to fight some of the others, but I do know that once somebody in the Cult of Vecna figures out what weapon the party is carrying, they're going to try to get that information back to Vecna. And whatever happens next is going to be the determining factor for how long it takes before the larger Cult of Vecna starts sending their heavy hitters to the valley. Although, it's possible it's going to be harder for this cult to get that message to Vecna than they might imagine, for reasons that some of you may be able to figure out after you watch that video later this week. But this is the leader of the local chapter of the Cult of Vecna, Brother Ezekiel. No, not brother. Witness. I think that's the name for members of this cult. They call themselves the Witnesses. Oh, dang, I also could have named him Samuel instead. That's kind of a biblical name as well. It is a biblical name, but also a reference to the movie Witness. Oh well, that's fine. I like Ezekiel. So this is the first faction member our party will probably encounter in this Cult of Vecna. Witness Ezekiel. Okay, so the next faction would be some sort of sect of people who want the sword so they can destroy the Cult of Vecna. I did a quick Google, and it doesn't look like Kaz has any followers or a cult of his own in the official D&D lore, which is totally fine. If there was one, I was only going to probably steal the name of that faction and make up my own with the details I think are cool. And I'm sure that there are lots of organizations that would want to destroy Vecna if they had the sword, but I want there to be the one that is specifically dedicated to that task. Let's make them an order of knights. Not necessarily paladins, but certainly warriors dedicated to this cause. I don't want them to be vampires like Kaz was, because I like the idea that Vecna has pretty much cornered the market on undead. If you see an undead coming after the sword, They belong to Vecna and his legions. That makes the most sense to me. So even though Kas was a vampire, the other members of this order likely are not. They want to destroy Vecna, and they may be willing to do whatever it takes to do so. Again, there are probably lots of organizations that would like to destroy Vecna. He's bad. Worshippers of the goddess of death would absolutely take issue with an undead tyrant god. But maybe this faction we're talking about today used to be members of that church of the goddess of death, but their methods were too severe and they were excommunicated. Now they're just this secret anti-Vecna order of holy knights, and they believe they will be welcomed back into the loving embrace of their goddess if they can just achieve their ultimate goal of eliminating Vecna. Typically they go after cultists just to try to stop Vecna's influence and thwart his plans, and they're probably badass, take-no-prisoners types. They're probably willing to torture, all things that players do and think are completely fine. These guys do too. Maybe the players would love these guys, or maybe their methods would seem too shocking to them, even though most D&D players do the same thing in my experience. I genuinely don't know how the players will react. I often talk about how I don't just want there to be a faction of good guys who can solve all the players' problems for them, so I think even though this organization would ostensibly be very useful allies you could give the sword to and trust that they would go on a Vecna-killing mission, I kind of want the players to wonder whether or not these are good guys at all. A good point of reference might actually be Jet from Avatar: The Last Airbender. This organization's goals are understandable. Their methods are a lot more dubious. But the point is, these zealots believe that getting their hands on the sword would take them to the big time, would give them the power to actually go after Vecna and his most powerful supporters. Let's call this faction the Crimson Pact, because they're essentially honoring the mission of Kas the Bloody-Handed, so we have the connection to the color red to help link this faction to that character in the players' minds. Once they learn more about Kas, it will kind of help teach them more about the Crimson Pact as well. It'll connect, it'll be sticky in their minds, hopefully. Once again, this faction needs a leader, or at least a first representative we're going to meet, and visually I'm imagining something sort of similar to this art of Kas. Someone with a long hair and a beard and a powerful build. They wouldn't be a vampire, and I imagine them being a lot rougher around the edges. This image is a little bit too clean cut. I want someone you believe could be a total monster, but could also make you believe he could be noble. And both could be true depending on whether or not he considers you an enemy. Imagine Jason Momoa, but wearing a suit of armor. That's basically what I'm visualizing. And for some reason, the name Cutter jumped into my head, but maybe that's too cutesy. After all, the sword cut off Vecna's hand and cut out his eye. Is that too cute? I can't decide if I love it or hate it. But I also like the name Carter, and I couldn't decide which one I liked more. Cutter is a little too cutesy, but it also does capture the vibe of this character. But Carter can also capture his vibe. If I name him Carter, that will be his name. It'll capture his vibe. Plus, Carter's a name that means your family built carts. And I like the idea that the members of this faction would have come from more low-born origins. Our lead knight isn't as wealthy and highbrow as witness Ezekiel, who has brought all the comforts of home with him into this dungeon, surrounding himself with the air of nobility. These knights are more like men and women and NBs of the people, at least in their own minds. Now, in this case, I do think the knights refer to each other as brother and sister and sibling, because that helps reinforce the idea that they are holy warriors. So this is Brother Cutter? Yeah, I've decided I do hate it. Brother Cutter does not sound good. It doesn't feel good for me to say. Brother Carter, yeah, that works. I do like that. But finally, we need one more faction. These aren't bad guys who want to destroy the sword, and it's not good guys who want to destroy the bad guys. Instead, let's make this the faction who actually had the sword and want it back. Obviously, these can't be good guys who would use it to kill Vecna because they clearly weren't doing that. Or if they were failing. And so, why do we care what they have to say? I also don't think these are bad guys who serve Vecna or another evil god, because if they knew where the sword was, they would be sending all of their powerful forces after the party, and that's going to ramp things up too much, too quickly. So no, this is just somebody who wants to hold on to their treasure and wants it back. And man, that really does say dragon, doesn't it? And here's the thing. I already had some plans to use dragons elsewhere in this campaign. One of the other factions, one that's going after the shield that the players are also looking for, is going to be a family of dragons, trying to use that shield to get access to a huge treasure vault. I can't have two factions of dragons, that's too similar. Maybe this faction going after the sword will be a mummy lord instead. Except I already said that I like associating undead with Vecna, at least for the most part, at least for the ones searching after the sword. As much as I love mummies and mummy lords, their servants and acolytes and disciples would be more religious zealots, and we already have that with these first two factions. They would feel too samey. And besides, I love the idea that the dragon would immediately know that one of its magic items was missing from its hoard. That's a classic trope that goes all the way back to The Hobbit. It would be the perfect way to introduce a dragon to the campaign. The first dragon the players are going to have to deal with, really, as far as they're aware. So maybe that first faction looking for the shield that's going on in that other subplot is not a faction of dragons? I don't know, do I want two factions of dragons? I don't think so. Well, that's what I might have said at the beginning of this year. But then, in April, I made a video about how you can reinterpret dragons to basically be the Mafia. And so maybe the search for the sword can bring another dragon and its followers into the valley, and that can actually lead to some conflict between these two factions of dragons, both competing for territory and looking for treasure. Even though they're not looking for the same thing, they would both want what the other one wants if they discover that the other one is looking for it. And here's the thing. Like I said earlier, lots of factions might want the Sword of Kas if they find out it exists. Today I'm just focusing on the 3 factions that are moving this entire storyline forward. But those factions can also bounce off of the other factions in this campaign in interesting ways. Just because I didn't design the shield-searching dragon faction to have a clash with another faction of a dragon, doesn't mean that that's not still a really compelling idea. So yeah, there's another dragon who had this sword in its lair, and now they're trying to get it back. I've already planted the seeds for a red dragon in the history of this valley. My players haven't picked up on it, but it's still present. It might come up later in the campaign, but I also pictured that this family of blue dragons is trying to get their hands on the shield. So because I want whoever had the sword to be a different kind of dragon than the ones I've already established, because I don't want them to feel like they're connected, it can be a green, black, or white dragon. Also, wherever this sword was hidden, that dragon's lair could have been very far away. So White Dragon might be kind of perfect. I actually really like this, because the dragon could start the storyline just like the other factions, sending henchmen at the party. But eventually they're going to run out, probably faster because the dragon came from so far away. And once they enter the battle themselves and take matters into their own hands, it could still be an adult white dragon and still be the weakest dragon of that age group. So it would be a little bit more balanced towards the party, since they are presumably going to be, I don't know, maybe level 10 by the time they encounter this dragon. I'll have to look at the math and see if that makes sense. Adult white dragon might kill them, but I'll deal with that problem later on. White dragons are also very primal and animalistic, so even though they're smart, they would still have their own followers, but they would also be very direct, not as cunning or willing to make deals as the other 2 factions are. And like I said, I really like the idea that this white dragon can demonstrate how far the genie had to go to get this sword, because this white dragon and his followers are coming to this valley from so far away, and now they are completely out of their element. Now, I think it would be really fun for this faction to have the ability to summon other kinds of monsters. That way, anytime I just want to throw in some random creature, like an invisible stalker or an arcanoloth or any devil or demon, I could justify it through this faction. So I think the first henchman of this dragon is going to be a sanguine summoner. This is a spellcaster NPC enemy that I created for my Patreon. It's somebody whose body is covered with tattoos of different animals, and whenever they take damage, one of these animals is activated. It no longer becomes a tattoo, but a living creature who joins the battle. I also like this idea because this is a mage who would basically walk around shirtless to show off all these tattoos, and that lines up with the idea that these folks came from a much colder climate, so they've had to shed a lot of their other clothes to enter this valley because they're used to a much colder environment. It also reminds me of Baldur in God of War 2018, who was a major influence on the idea of a wizard covered in tattoos back when I was developing this character. However, I'm on my 3rd henchman of 3 factions. I would love for one of these henchmen to be a woman, but I also love the idea of using the visual of Baldur covered in tattoos. So I think there are actually going to be 2 major henchmen working for the dragon, and the woman is also a summoner, someone who reaches into other realities and draws monsters forth, specifically devils and demons. And I think she and the sanguine summoner are basically an item, and that way if one of them dies, probably the sanguine summoner, the other one can escape and vow revenge on whoever killed their partner. The demon summoner can also send demons and devils after the party without actually being present herself, which helps extend that storyline for a little bit longer and make it a little bit more interesting. But the dragon also has a much more limited pool of allies to bring into this fight because they had to travel from so far away. So that means once the lovers have failed to accomplish this mission, it's going to be time for the dragon to intervene himself. So before we wrap up here today, let's name these lovers who will be the first members of this faction that the players interact with. I think the girl is Madeline, named after Madeline Pryor from X-Men comics. Because once again, if this is a spellcaster who comes from a colder climate, when she gets here, she's going to disrobe a little bit, which means she's basically going to be a sexy witch. I didn't do that on purpose. I wasn't looking for a justification to have a sexy witch in my D&D game, but I don't mind it. I think the female players in my game are probably going to like her a lot. Our sanguine summoners modeled after Baldur, and I can't use that name. That would be distracting for a group of players who have both played God of War and played Baldur's Gate 3. I could name him after the actor who played Baldur, Jeremy Davies. I'm a big fan of his, but I don't think this character looks like a Jeremy, and I don't think the name Jeremy is particularly imposing. No offense to the Jeremys out there, but it's not an intimidating name. Much like Jeremy Davies often doesn't play intimidating characters, which is why I can't name him Timothy or Upham, like his character in Saving Private Ryan. The second reference to an actor from that movie this month after the Vin Diesel video. I don't have anything to add to that, just a fun fact, I guess. But I could use the name Daniel. That was the name of his character on Lost. It's another biblical name, and if he has a lion on his chest that bursts forth one of the times he takes damage, that could also be a really fun reference. Also, I should probably name the dragon they're working for, right? God, I'm so bad at naming dragons, though. So I'm just going to steal a dragon name from somewhere else. I could take one from Critical Role. There have been a bunch of white dragons, but I'm actually going to use the name of the white dragon that popped up in Acquisitions Incorporated like 10 years ago. The dragon Isohedrus. So these are the factions that are coming after the sword. And I don't know when they're going to enter the picture. Logistically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for any of them to jump into the situation right away because it would take some time for each faction to discover that the sword has been found. With the exception of the dragon, who would know it immediately and send their people right after them, but it would probably take them a while to actually get here. We can assume that the dragon has an orb they can use to spy on people from afar. That's how he finds the sword, and that's also very deliberately a reference to the cover of the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. But because they have to travel from so far away, it's going to take them a while just to get to the valley and start this storyline. In truth, I don't know which faction my player's going to interact with first. I don't even know which adventure they're going on next. That's why in another video you're going to see very soon, I'm going to start prepping an adventure that I haven't even put in front of them yet, because I know that dungeon is going to take a little bit more time to get ready, and I want to get a head start on it because my players really like to keep me on my toes. But now that I've done this work, when I'm ready for the moment when it's time to introduce these factions into the narrative to help complicate the heroes' lives and propel them towards another D&D adventure, I'm going to have everything I need to kick that storyline off with a bang. I think it might be fun to even have some dice that represent some of these factions, which is good news because this video is sponsored by Only Crits. And so let's turn things over to our Only Crits spokesman, Winnie the Pooh. Hello there, I heard you were interested in getting your hands on some fancy dice. Well, luckily for you, today is Black Friday, and Only Crits has a Black Friday sale running right now. You can order any 2 dice sets and get the 3rd for free. So for your Vecna dice, you can get a dice set that has an eyeball inside each die. For the Crimson Pact, you can get the Crimson Gold Chroma Metal dice, which carry all the weight of an armored Jason Momoa. They look like stained glass, which helps represent the religious aspect of that faction, and the red and gold help capture the faction's color scheme. And for the dragon and his followers, you can get the Dragon Eye Blue Fuck Me dice, which have an eye inside them, and they come with a d20 that says fuck you on the 20 and fuck me on the 1. And nothing says you're fighting a dragon quite like a die that says fuck you on it. Additionally, Only Crits has a mystery dice box subscription where every month they send you a new set of dice. And with the Black Friday discount, you can get your first month of a mystery dice subscription for only $1. So visit onlycrits.com and take advantage of their Black Friday sale to get some dice of your own. And thank you so much to Only Crits for sponsoring this video. Cheerio! Hey, Winnie the Pooh, before you go, Odwick, the algorithm wizard, said that he got rid of Future Mike and I'd never see him again. Did he kill him? I never got an answer on that. All I know is he told me nobody would ever see him again. Nobody would ever see him again. Man, that really sounds like he was killed. Do you think Odwick would actually go that far? Look, I'm not comfortable talking about this. Odwick said to forget about Future Mike, so that's what I'm doing. Okay, I get it. He scares you. Fair enough. Thanks for answering my question. I appreciate it. Did you do anything fun for Thanksgiving? Oh, I spent it the way I spend all my Thanksgivings, watching all the Thanksgiving episodes of my favorite TV show, Friends. Friends is your favorite TV show? That's right. My favorite episode is the Thanksgiving episode with Brad Pitt in it. It's so funny. That's not even the best Thanksgiving episode. The one with the trifle is... You know what? Never mind. I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving, Winnie the Pooh. And I hope everyone out there who celebrates the holiday also had a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And I hope you got some rest because I have a bunch more content coming your way. I mentioned that the Cult of Vecna is going to make an appearance in another dungeon I'm working on. You'll see that video very soon. We've got another Critical Role Demystified video coming very, very soon, and another one next week. That's a weekly series now because the algorithm wizard cast a curse on me, and now I have to make a new episode every week. And I've got another Daggerheart video coming next week, the last one of the year, because holy crap, we're almost at the end of the year. That's wild. This has been a very weird year for so many reasons, but I am so grateful to have you here for it. So stay tuned because I got some awesome stuff planned. Also, did you see this video where I built a government for my D&D world? If not, go check it out. It's really good. Until next time, play fair and have fun.